Welcome to another episode of Holding All the Cards. I'm your host, Kiramode, and today we're going to be talking about mana fixing. Mana fixing is a relevant topic right now because of the affiliation splits. I think people are seeing the value of getting an extra refresh, getting an extra resource, or getting an extra card. And people are actually starting to look at even more ways to splash in stuff because they notice it's not the end of the world to not have that perfect 6-4 or 7-3 split if you decide to go split affiliations. So what I'm going to talk about today, it should be a fairly quick one, is just what to consider when building one of these decks that has a non-conventional resource match scheme, and then also what's it called, when to maybe step away from it. Now, I think the common mistake that people make when they think about mana fixing or when they play pods off color is they'll say something to the degree of, oh, well, you can play this pod off color because you only lose X amount of cards. An example of this would be, let's say you want to play Thrawn off color, right? You only lose 2 Navy cards. If you play them, it's a 2x, you lose 4 cards. So you'd say something along the lines of, if you play Thrawn off color in Sith, right, like 8 Sith pods and 2 Navy pods, you would say you lose 4 cards out of your deck, but out of those 4 cards, 2 of them are 3 pippers and 2 of them are 2 pippers. That ain't bad, right? You're not really losing all that much. The problem with this sort of line of thinking is, if you're playing Thrawn's pod, you're playing it for the objective because you want to get early Palpatines and early Vaders, but you're also playing it because you want Thrawn, right? Thrawn's the guy. The other cards in his pod are dick. So if you lose the one card that's really, really important for that deck, why are you playing that pod in the deck in the first place? Like, just play some Sith pod. And that's something that I think gets missed in this topic, where it's like, you can't just count the amount of cards that you lose. You have to think about how those cards function within the context of a deck. So I think the most obvious example of this is like Yoda inside of Med Freeman's capital ship deck. So it's an 11 pod deck. It runs 9 Rebel pods, is Rebel affiliated, and has 2 May the Force be with yous. That deck has about a 60% chance to hit May the Force be with you on the flop, which means 40% of the time you don't have May the Force be with you. You're not playing Yoda. You're not playing Yoda. You seek Yoda. In that deck, it doesn't matter, though, because Yoda's not there because you want the Muppet. Yoda's there because you want the edge. You need the Seed's existence in the deck. You want the 10 pips that the pod brings. You want a 5 pip edge card. So playing Yoda doesn't totally matter. You're going to win off of your capital ships. That's the most important part. So the objective doesn't really matter. I mean, you want the objective because you want to be able to refresh cards like Defiance. You want to be able to refresh Home 1. You want to be able to refresh the Chuds. But it's not the end of the world if you don't hit the objective. Whereas if you were to play Yoda within the context of like a control deck on light side, and you can't play Yoda all of a sudden, now taking the Force is harder. In any sort of control deck where you can't take the Force, the deck just sort of face plants because you're giving away too many dial ticks and you're not going to have enough time to win the game. Not to mention you can also now dead draw more likely. So it's important to think about when you're going to splash in a pod is like the cards that need resource match. How vital are they to the success of your deck? Are they cards that you just need for edge and a couple tricks that are like neutrals or a couple zero cost effects, or are they like vital to the deck? Like, you could theoretically play Skyhopper off faction, right? The Skyhopper Chud is neutral, the event is free, target's free, and then Bullseye is also free. But the problem is, if you're playing Skyhopper, it's because you want to play Skyhopper. The other cards are fine, there's nothing wrong with them, but like Skyhopper itself is pretty damn important. That's where the juice of the deck is. Odds are your entire deck revolves around making Skyhopper broken as fuck. So you can't really splash him off color, if that makes sense. Anyways, but going more towards assuming that you have the right sort of deck for splashing, let's now talk about what you need to consider. So the first is, what are your raw percentages to get hosed? This is just on the flop. What are your chances to get resource screwed. Now, for a typical 10 pod deck, if you have 2 objectives off color, chances of hitting those objectives are 66%. 3 objectives, 83%. 4 objectives, 92%. 5 objectives, 97%. And then if you have 6 objectives, it's like 99.6%. This is why people like the 6-4 split. Right? If you have a 6-4 split, the chances of getting just the 4 are so low that you might as well not even consider it. But then as you go 5 or lower, it starts creeping up in terms of the amount of ways that you can get screwed over. And this is particularly relevant for like the 6-6 splits and the 5-5 splits, because while those are like 3%, you play the deck 20 times, you're more likely than not to get screwed over at least once. And when you get screwed over, that kind of sucks. So once you know that raw percentage, you can choose to accept it. So I think accepting it makes sense in some cases. So for example, I think the best one of we're just going to accept we're going to lose a certain amount of games is like 7-card Jedi. So one of the strongest decks in the game right now is 7-card Reserve Jedi, where it's basically you play Cassian, Dodonna, Hera for the Rebel slots, and then Yoda and any 4 other Jedi pods for the Jedi slots, and the deck's really good. Now, the problem with this is oftentimes in the Jedi slots, Yoda's not a really high blast pod, but then you also look and think, what if you play Guardians as a 1-of? That has no blast. What if you play the Mystics? That has very little blast. What if you play Kiramode? That also has little blast. So you could very well end up in a situation where, like, if you get locked out of red, you have like no blast, right? It's basically the Jedi pods plus Cassian's Chuds, and that's all you have. That's not a really viable game plan. But with that deck in particular, it's so strong when you have even 1 Rebel resource that it doesn't matter, right? The deck's powerful enough that you can take the 3% hit and you'll be fine. There's other decks that aren't as fortunate. There's other decks that if they miss that resource match, they're going to be a little bit more likely to lose, in which case you can't accept it. So then you have to think about hedging, right? And so hedging can happen in one of 2 ways. The first way you can hedge is off of draws. The second way you can hedge is off of mana fixing. So let's start with draws first, and then we'll get to mana fixing second. So with regards to draws, the deck I just mentioned was a 7-card Reserve Jedi. The reason I brought that one up first is there's really no way you can draw your way out of that deck, right? So if let's say my deck is the 6 standard Rebel pods, and then I go 2 Yoda, 2 Guardians, 1 Mystic, 1 Kiramode. Let's assume best case scenario. You get your Yoda plus Nudge turn 1. You get Mystic plus Cassian Chud turn 2. And then you get like Kiramode plus another Cassian Chud turn 3. That's your best case scenario, right? That's like assuming draws go exactly as you want them. Maybe you sprinkle in there a couple resources so you get like an extra Guardian or something. That deck's not winning, man. Like against any sort of reasonably good like dark side draws, a deck with that little bit of blast is probably not getting it done with what it has on the table. And that's not even factoring in that if those guys die, like if they lightning Kiramode, or if Yoda gets murdered by guns or whatever, or they just stall out, or they lose a couple edge battles, they're done. There's no other backup plan. You don't have the Cassian in the wings. You don't have the Ghost coming to save the day. You're out of options. There's realistically no draws. On the other hand, let's change that deck up a little bit. So let's say instead of having 2 Guardians, 1 Kiramode, and 1 Mystics, your deck is you have 2 Yodas, 2 Owens, 2 Lukes. Anyone who's ever played against a deck that, and when I say Luke, I mean BTS Luke. Anyone that's ever played against a deck that has BTS Luke, Yoda, and Owen knows those 3 pods by themselves can win games provided that you draw the cards. So now if you say I deal 3 turns with that deck, assuming you don't ever hit any of your red resources, if you go turn 1 Yoda plus Nudge, turn 2 Luke plus Lightsaber, turn 3 Land Speeder plus Unfinished Business for the Luke that died earlier, you win the game. And now you have to get kind of lucky to get all that, but at least you can get lucky. And that's an important thing. It's an important thing to note that with just a slightly different deck setup, one deck has no chance of ever escaping the resource match problem. The other deck does, right? Like the deck that has Luke and Owen has enough juice that they can win the game. Or what if you simply go singletons? That's the other way you can go about this. So maybe it doesn't have to necessarily be high blast, but what if you go 2 Yodas, 1 BTS Luke, 1 Owen, 1 Tressa, and 1 let's say Kyle Katarn. You now have 5 distinct Jedi mains plus the chuds from Cassian plus the chuds from their own respective pods that you, again, if you draw the guys in order, as long as you don't dead draw, which I mean is likely because half of your deck's unplayable, but provided that you get a little bit lucky and you're drawing the right mains, you don't discard any of the Jedi mains in Edge and you save them and you play them, you can reasonably win with, you know, your in-faction stuff. Like there's a chance for you to come out of that. Whereas, you know, if like your in-faction stuff doesn't have a whole lot of blast, now you're kind of hosed. So that would be the backup plan with regards to draws, right? And that'd be something I'd look at, right? Like I'd think, okay, well, how reasonable is it for me to break out of this? Because if let's say my chances of getting resource locked are 3%, but out of all the games where I get resource locked, I can win 40% of them, 50% of them, or at least make it a battle, right? At least make it like so it's not embarrassing if I get the right draws. You know, then all of a sudden it's not the same equation anymore, right? It's not 3%, it might only be 2%, it might be like 1.5% or something closer to that, in which case now the resource match isn't as big of a problem as it would have otherwise been. Now let's talk about mana fixing. So mana fixing comes in a couple different ways. One way that you can mana fix is off of resources. The other one is off of card effects. So resources would be your most common one. Scum has no realistic mana fixing, unfortunately. Like if you play Scum off faction, there's not really a whole lot of things you can do. Navy has Chimera's resource. Sith has Vader's resource. And then Light Side has a bunch of stuff like Kanan for Jedis, and then you have the like rescue mission for Rebels, right? So like you can always use the superior intelligence to place the guy captured and then rescue mission him out. And then you have card effects like you have like the Falcon. The Falcon can bounce in out of faction dudes, and then the Kraken can bounce in out of faction dudes by just rescuing them. And then you also have MoMA. So like the MoMA chuds, they can bring out of faction resources into play, and then you get your resource match that way. And then both sides have influence resources. You have Jyn Erso on one side and you have Dr. Aphra on the other. So there's ways that you can do that, but what I would note about those is that they're really flimsy. And here's what I mean by that. If, let's say, I wanted to play a deck that was 8 Jedi pods plus Jyn Erso, and my only mana fixing was Jyn Erso's objectives, or Jyn Erso's resources, I can hit the resource match a pretty reasonable amount of the time, because I'm gonna hit the resource 66% of the time. But then I'm also going to hit one of her influence resources by turn 3, another, I don't know, say 32%-ish, right? About 30, let's say 30%. About 30% of the time. So, you know, you factor that in as well. You would then say that my chances of hitting my resource match are about 80%. That's good. The problem is, what about that other 20%, right? Like if Jyn Erso is in the deck for a reason, if let's say you're playing Jyn Erso because you really want Jyn on the table, well, you're not going to have her 1 out of 5 games. So it's really hard for me to believe that like 80% of Jyn Erso is better than like 100% of some other Jedi pod. And I mean, that's just one example, but like, you'd have to really consider how strong that pod is at whatever percentage discount it is versus just some other pod that might be a little bit worse, but you get the full usage 100% of the time. So that'd be like something worth considering with the mana fixing. When I look at the mana fixing, I think of it more as instead of a reliable thing, just like a hedge. So when I play Force Hunters on Dark Side, the move is you play the refresh affiliation, so you can untap the spiders, and that's super degenerate. You play your 5 your 5 scum and your 5 Sith. I typically only put 1 Vader. Some people like putting in 2 because they're really worried about resource matching. I'm not too worried about it. My thought is, you know what? If I play Vader as a 1-of, the chances of me hitting a red resource in my opening flop, about 97.5%, seems pretty good. For that 2.5% chance where I miss, that sucks. You just hope that with Vader's resource in there, that gets lowered to like 2%. And even if you miss, the 2% of games where you miss, that's where you look and say, you know what? I got 4 lackeys, I got 2 Banes, I have 2 spiders, I have a duel, and I have, like, in my case, Ponda Baba plus, Dr. Evazan. I would just hope that those guys plus whatever neutrals I have for the Sith side are enough to push me through. Like that's just enough juice to get me through one game. You're hoping a dual combo just triggers and can save you out of it. And if out of the games where I have no red resources and no mana fixing, if I can win, say, 20% of those games, now I've just lowered my number from 2% down to like 1.6% or whatever. So you can just keep lowering that percentage of getting hosed little bit by little bit if you have a combination of mana fixing and you have a combination of a backup plan with regards to draws. So when you're building your deck and you're thinking, oh, I want to be creative, I want to try other stuff, that's what I would look at. Like I just first look at and think, okay, if I don't hit my resource match, can I draw my way out of it? Is there a magical combination of cards that I can draw that can realistically win me the game, and can I hit it in often enough times for it to matter? That's like one thing. And then I also look, okay, do I have any sort of mana fixing? And this is why, like, when people play Falcon Jedi with the 2 affiliations, there's a debate of, like, do I play the 2 resources so I can play a turn 1 Falcon, or do I play the refresh to make, like, one of my guys elite? And the reason I think a lot of players go towards the refresh side more than anything is just that if you have a smuggler affiliation, that means you can play Falcon, and Falcon can bounce for Luke, Falcon can bounce for Obi-Wan, and Falcon can bounce for Yoda. So at that point, it doesn't matter if you get hosed out of your Jedi resource match. Your deck's still fine. You can still function. You can still win a game. Like, you play your smuggler stuff and Falcon just bounces like that. Like, that's your answer for the case where you don't hit your stuff. Or I remember a while back there was a deck that HATC made. Greedo shot first on the forums for Nationals 2016, and his deck was 7 Jedi pods, 3 smuggler pods, where the 3 smuggler pods were 2 Falcon and 1 Gamor. And the way he explained it, he just wanted the resources, right? Falcon's resources neutral, so you're fine there. He wanted the edge, and he wanted the card draw from the objectives. And if you don't hit the objectives, that's fine. Like, the rest of your deck can still have enough juice to push you through. You still have the higher hands. You lose a Bamboozle, that sucks, but it's not the end of the world, right? Like, his deck had a reasonable chance to win, even if he didn't hit the resource match. And that's all you need, right? Like, you don't need the deck to be perfect when you miss your objective flop. You just need the deck to be passable when you miss your objective flop, and be really, really good when you hit your objective flop to make up the difference for when your deck's a little bit weaker. All right, so that's all I had for today. If you have any other thoughts or ideas, send them over to me. When I make these episodes, I kind of go with what's off the top of my head, and I've already done a lot of the ideas I want. So if you want a topic covered, let me know. And I've been working on some jank, so I'll be making some deck spotlights soon. See you later.